Okay, guys, good morning. Good morning to some of you, good evening to some others of you. So welcome to the DMI IBP leadership session webinar, which is going to talk about the IBP process, but have an emphasis and a focus around people's involvement in that process and how we believe that people are certainly the key to success in any IBP, and in truth have always been the key to success with sales and operations planning. In fact, it would be fair to say, would it not, that people are the key to success in most things. Their engagement, their behaviour, their involvement. It's many years ago that I heard someone say that if you take the people out of a business, then you are left with nothing. Not left with something, you are left with nothing. Because if you take the people out of a manufacturing business, then you're left with a building, and eventually that building will fall over. Eventually you're left with some stock and some materials. Eventually that stock and materials will rot. So without people, you are really ripping out the heart of any business, and it will die. And therefore, the opposite is true, that as we move forward and try to drive success and build our businesses, and people are clearly the key to that success. So as I say, welcome to the DMI session. I hope it's not too late or too early for you, because you are all spread all around the world. So hope you're staying safe in these difficult times. But let's start with moving forward around IBP. What we're talking about here is the opportunity to create what some people refer to, and I'm sure many of you who have been around S&OP and IBP in the past have heard people say one set of numbers. I put a slightly different angle on that phrase. One set of numbers would imply genuinely we all use one set of numbers. I think it's important that numbers, which are basically data, are used to provide information, and therefore that information must be shown and illustrated and presented in a terminology and in a style that is suitable for that particular use. So financial people clearly will want to see numbers in financial values and margins, etc. Manufacturing people will probably want to see numbers in terms of capacity and volume. Salespeople will want to see in terms of sales value, net sales revenue, or market sector. The important thing here is the integrated word. In fact, integration is a very big theme about everything we do here. I believe that most of us, if not all of us, have always done the elements of integrated business planning. It's called common sense. Why wouldn't we? What's missing in most businesses, however, is the integration. We all sort of go in slightly different directions. Hence, we choose the term here, integrated set of numbers, as compared to one set of numbers. And in that way, we will all be singing from the same hymn sheet. We'll all be going in the same direction, which is the one team piece. It's very difficult to do that if we are all working to our own set of numbers, our own volumes, our own information, if it's not integrated. So we have a big theme here of integration. The very word integrated business planning, I think everybody does business planning. What's missing in most cases is the integration word. Hence, that's going to figure heavily throughout this webinar. So what we're trying to do here from a total model perspective is join all the dots together. So the model we present here is very much a side-to-side, end-to-end, top-to-bottom model. And so just explaining this, where that IBP has a very key function in linking the top to the bottom. As you can see on the third bar there, leadership execution through IBP. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to set a vision and a mission for our organization. We're trying to therefore set strategy and strategic business objectives. What we then need to do is link those, and link is a weak word. We need to integrate those into the day-to-day management of our organization. So we will have the classic elements of an IBP process in terms of portfolio or project management. we'll have customer demand or forecasting, and we'll have supply chain management. Those three columns have detailed processes sat below them. So take a simple one, the forecasting process will clearly sit below customer demand management. Abnormal demand management will sit in the same place. Taking customer orders in the same place. In supply chain, we'll have master production scheduling, we'll have material planning, we'll have capacity planning, we'll have shop floor management, we'll have warehouse management, we'll have distribution management. Within portfolio, we'll have project management, stage and gate, etc. And so the detailed processes that we run our businesses are contained within those three columns. What links my strategy to my day-to-day, month-to-month, week-to-week management is the IBP process. So we see IBP very much as not the strategic planning process, but we see it as, which we think is separate, but we see it as the execution of that strategic plan. So it's an execution process to ensure we're delivering the strategic business objectives, the business plan, the vision, and the mission. Hence, we see that's the job of leadership. Leadership are there to deliver the vision of the organization, the strategy of the organization. What process do they have to be able to do that is the role that we believe IBP plays. Hence, we refer to it as the execution process. Being a little cynical, most organizations will have some form of strategic planning process. They may even have a strategic planning away day or workshop where they will go and set the objectives for the organization for the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years. If you think about the output of those days, they're very often well-defined, well-documented, well-presented strategic documents. Just think about in most organizations, and maybe you're not in this category, but in most organizations I've ever been in the 30 years I've been doing this, that strategic plan is put on the shelf, which is marked strategic planning. What happens to that? What process executes that on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis? Or do we simply wait until the following year when we review that strategic plan, comment on how good it was and comment on how well we should have done it, and then say, let's do it next year? If there is no process to connect that strategic plan to the day-to-day, week-to-week operation of the business, then one shouldn't be really very surprised if it's not executed. And that's why we see IBP in that role. Now, in terms of the total model here, below and sort of overarching, I know below is not overarching, but overarching, all of this says we're never going to be good enough. So continuous improvement has to become a habit in the organization. I'm not a fan of having a continuous improvement department. I was working with a client the other week and they said, who do we go to with these requests for changes, as in improvement opportunities? I said, you go to everybody. Everybody is responsible for continuous improvement in the organization. It shouldn't be something that sits, left field in a corner. It underpins, is a better word than overarching, it underpins everything we do. As is the theme of this webinar, people and change management are the key. People development, as you'll see later, is a specific point in the DMI IBP process. And that's because a number of years ago, well, actually, let me back up slightly. If you look at many of the surveys of the CEOs and the world, and pose the question, what's the thing that keeps you awake at night? What's the thing highest on your agenda? What do you worry about? What's high on the business thinking today? A very high percentage of the answers will include the attraction, the retention, and the development of people. It is a key management process today. Now, what coronavirus will do to that, I don't know. Will it make it more important or less important? I don't think it possibly can make it less important. There may be more people available post-coronavirus, but actually getting the right people, developing those people is still a major business issue. Now, if IBP is going to be the process by which we run the business, It's not the only process, but it's the primary process by which we run the business. And if people development and retention, etc., are a key business issue, where does that fit into the IBP process? And I'll return to that when we look at the IBP model in a few slides' time. Change management is with us. Again, what's the new normal? Will changes resulting from coronavirus be the only changes we ever see? Well, clearly not. The world is changing and will change continuously. So therefore, managing that change, and change management is a fancy term, but actually change management is the management of people doing different things. That's what that really is. It's about managing behavior change, which is, of course, why it's very difficult. But therefore, a key underpinning element to this whole model. People respond to two things. People respond to the way, what they understand, hence the importance of education. People don't know what they don't know, and therefore, if we want to drive people in a certain way, an integrated team-based way, then they have to have the right level of education. As a famous and somebody who I admire greatly person said, the way people respond is based upon the why, not the how. The why being, why do I do this? Why should I do this? Not how do I do this? The focus of education is very much about the why. The focus of training is very much about the how. We need both, but that's the point. We need both. The second thing people respond to is how they get measured, hence the KPIs and critical success factors here. If I measure you irrationally, how will you behave? And the simple answer to that one is, if you measure me irrationally, I will behave irrationally. In fact, somebody once said to me, if you measure me irrationally, behaving irrationally is in fact very rational, and absolutely true. Then underpinning the whole thing is an extremely boring topic. That boring topic is called data. We all know if we build our house on sand, then the house falls over. And the data is basically the foundation to all of this. But how much reverence, and I choose that word quite deliberately, how much reverence do people put on data quality? And I mean data quality throughout the business. Many years ago, and many years ago, I played professional football for a living. I wasn't very good, and that's why I do this for a living now, but nevertheless, when I was playing football, I witnessed an interview with somebody called Bill Shankly, which is quite ironic this week. Bill Shankly was the manager of Liverpool Football Club when they were doing rather well, just like they've done rather well this week. And he was interviewed by a guy called David Coleman, who's quite a famous sports commentator in the UK here. And Coleman said to Shankly, what is the secret of Liverpool's success? And Shankly's answer was very interesting. I can't do his accent, he was a Scotsman, but what he said was, there is no secret to our success. This game is about passing and tackling. The winning comes easy. Now, if you think about the game of football, that is exactly the truth. If you do the basics well, if you pass better than anybody else, if you tackle better than anybody else, if you play for 90 minutes, then actually winning's not that tough. And for me, the basics of the game called business is the data. You may win that one big match with lousy data because you get lucky, you score a fantastic goal, but you won't win the league. And that's exactly what happens with business. And you may get that one big contract with lousy data. You may get lucky on those occasions, but you won't be sustained in your position of competitiveness. And clearly, my argument would be what matters in business is not winning the one contract, but the sustainability of that business for the long term. Hence, data I perceive to be an extremely key part of this whole process. So we get back to the theme of integration, and here we see the integration of systems, of process, and people. Now, in process terms, for this occasion, we're talking about the IBP process. Systems is not heavily dependent upon, or IBP is not heavily dependent on systems, but certainly the underpinning processes, the ERP systems, the financial systems, all of the computer systems that support those processes are vital. But what we're saying here is the most important part of this is the integration of all three things. That little piece in the middle, which we euphemistically refer to as the sweet spot. You know, I've stolen that phraseology. I've stolen that phraseology from sport. Excuse me. From sport, you hear a golf player perhaps say, "Wow, I hit the sweet spot that time." What that really means is he got everything right. He got his weight on the right foot. They middle the ball. They got the swing just right. And when those three things happen in unison, then you get maximum power and maximum direction in the shot, and you'll hear the golfer say, "Wow, I hit the sweet spot that time." Now, the difference between myself and Tiger Woods in this instance is very simple. The difference between myself and Tiger Woods is I comment when I hit the sweet spot. Tiger Woods comments when he doesn't. In other words, I played as good a shot as Tiger Woods. I remember doing it. I think it was 1987 I did it. The difference, of course, is that he plays that same shot 68 times around. In other words, he lives and breathes in that integration spot. That's why he's world class, and I'm pretty useless because I only hit that spot occasionally. Same thing with business. The world-class organizations live and breathe in that spot in the middle. The non-world-class organizations pass through that spot occasionally with the immortal words, "My goodness, it all worked." It all working must be the norm, not the exception. Now, if you think about implementation, and I think this is an obvious question, but which of those three things is the most difficult to change or improve? Systems, process, people and behavior. I think the answer to that question is very obvious. I think it's people and behavior. Systems, anybody can implement systems. You often need very deep pockets and a big checkbook, but it's not difficult. You can implement whatever new technology you so choose. Process is slightly more difficult, but you know, it's not beyond the wit of man to seek out best practice and copy it. Changing people, much more difficult because we're then talking about changing those things we talked about on the previous slide, which are called behavior, and changing people's behavior and culture is often used in that term. It is extremely difficult. Where we're focused here is very much on that integration spot again, but it's about how do we embrace the people element of our business. So let's look at the model that we've now come up with. There are many people who are familiar with the S&OP, IBP thinking over the past 30 years, of which I've been involved since. In fact, interestingly, I went on the very first S&OP, as it was called in those days, but the very first S&OP training course ever conducted in the UK was in 1983 in a place called Crewe, which is in the northwest of the UK. And I attended that course. The reason it was in Crewe is because Rolls-Royce were based in Crewe, which is where I worked, and we sent a load of people on it. So they ran the course really for ourselves. And it was then referred to, or it evolved into, what's known as the 5-step process. You will note on here that there are 6 steps in my model, possibly 7 with the project management, but it's not an official step. So those 6 steps that I've now included are the portfolio review, that's the product review, the demand review, that's the demand plan and forecasting, the supply chain review, that's manufacturing and supply chain. Those 3 steps are the common 3 steps of the 5-step, first 3 steps of the 5-step model. You'll note, however, below that, I've now introduced a deliberate and specific people development review. This is not about hiring and firing. This is about the thing I said was keeping those CEOs awake at night, the attraction, the retention, and the development of people. I would also throw into this the development of emotional intelligence within the organization and the development of social responsibility and health and safety. All of those people-related things I see as a deliberate step, because people development, according to the 500 CEOs that we interviewed, is high on the agenda. And the way this came about was interesting. A number of years ago, I was working with Mars, the confectionery company in Dubai, and I was banging on about people, as I typically do. And the HR lady there said, "Okay, Dave, Dave, you keep saying about people. Where does people fit into this IBP process?" Because at that time, there was no step. It was the traditional 5-step process. And my answer was, typical of a consultant, to try and buy some time, my answer was everywhere. And she said, "Well, that's not good enough. You have to do better than that." And so we went through the thinking, and although at that time we didn't actually include it as a specific step, actually we did. And she ran this people development step in the cycle of IBP. Hence, when we developed this model, as it has developed over the past 30 years, but when we most recently developed this model, we included it as a deliberate step. That feeds into the traditional financial and scenario planning review, which sets the priorities and the recommendations for the leadership team review. So my 6 steps are portfolio, demand, supply chain, people, finance, and leadership. However, you'll see that bubble at the top there, which we call major projects, or PMO, project management office. What that's saying is going back to the belief that IBP is not the only, but the primary method of running our process of running our business. If that is the case, where do those company-wide projects that don't naturally fit into portfolio, demand, supply, or people, or finance for that matter, where do they fit into, where do they get into the process? So examples that are most commonly used would be the implementation of a major IT system, the ERP system, for example. Where would that fit into the IBP process? And traditionally, it wouldn't. It would be just left field somewhere. And yet, a major IBP, a major ERP or systems implementation will have a significant impact on money. It will have a significant impact on resources. It will be typically quite disruptive, and typically it won't go that well. So where do those type of things, another example might be the moving of a head office, or the building of a new factory. You might argue that's in supply chain, but where do those big company-wide projects fit? And again, traditionally the answer was nowhere. Our model says, well, they need to have their own review, and they need to fit into at least the financial section of this before it goes to leadership. Now, just bear in mind, the belief of those 6 or possibly 7, if you include the PMO review, the focus of those 6 reviews is all the same. It is what has changed since the last time we reviewed this. So let's take demand. What has changed since the last time we reviewed the demand plan, which was last month? What are the implications of those changes on our business? And what decisions do we need to make? So let me repeat that. What's changed? What are the implications, business implications? And what decisions we need to make? That's the same for all of those steps. Now, the decisions, therefore, says if we're going to make decisions at each of these reviews, who needs to be there? Well, that's pretty obvious. That will be decision makers. So who would be expected to be running the demand review? Well, the sales director. The supply chain review, the supply chain or operations director. The portfolio review. That depends a little bit on the industry we're in, but in my industry, the automotive industry, for example, that would be the product engineering director. In a fast-moving consumer goods industry, that would probably be the marketing director. Who would we expect to run the people development review? Well, that would be the HR director, the finance director. And who would we expect to be at the leadership team review? It says it on the tin, the leadership team. So this IBP is very much an empowering process. Hence, it again has that link back to people. IBP is not a process. It's not a conduit to get all of the problems of the world to the CEO's desk at the leadership team view with a little message that says, beats the heck out of me, you make the decision. That's absolutely not the objective. The objective is to move everything backwards into the process itself. In fact, I often say about the leadership team review, the leadership team is a significant, why is it significant? Well, because it's the leadership team, insignificant event. Why is it insignificant? Well, because all of the decisions have been made through the process. And only those things that require the whole leadership team to make that decision, or it's bigger than any one of us, only those things go to that final leadership team review. If we're going to make decisions at these reviews, the comment in the arrow that says recommendations doesn't only apply to the leadership team review, it applies to each of the other reviews. And therefore, what comes into a review is not a problem for discussion, like the old A-level question, you discuss. That what comes into those reviews is what has changed, what are the implications, and what decision do we need to make based upon these recommendations. So if I continue to develop this diagram, it would get very messy, but recommendations is a key input to any of those reviews. Now, the G5 little bubbles are also significant. I've said, and technically you should have a G6 because there should be one for the whole thing, often referred to as the IBP process lead or S&OP manager or IBP manager or words to that effect. But I've said who should own each of those steps. So portfolio review, marketing director or engineering director, sales director in demand. But they're not going to orchestrate that process. But what we believe is that what really matters in this model is not the review itself, but the preparation for those reviews. In fact, the work is done in the arrows, as they say. Who facilitates the work in the arrow? Well, it is the orchestrator, sometimes referred to as the facilitator, for each of those steps. And there's one for portfolio, demand, supply, people, finance, and an overall one. Before I included the people one, then it was a gang of 5. And that phraseology came from another Mars company, actually. It came from Mars in Russia, who we kept talking about this group, this team of 5 people, as it was, it would now be 6, being the people who orchestrate the IBP process. And the IBP lead there said, well, you keep referring to this gang of 5, and that sort of name stuck. Hence the thing that I've put in here, G5. My argument would be that those 5/6 people now are critical to the success of this whole process. Hence, put your most able people in those roles. Do not put junior people in those roles. Do not put people who you would have made redundant otherwise if you couldn't find this job for them. Put your most able people. And here's something that some of you may cough at, which apologies, I've been coughing a little bit here, and that is that those 5/6 roles, in our opinion, are full-time roles. I'll hesitate and say that again. They are full-time roles. They are not something that people do in their coffee break, over lunch, after school. They're full-time. If they're not full-time, they are resourced of significance. Significance is 75% or more. I stick to my first statement. They are full-time roles. I absolutely stick to the statement that the leader of that team is full-time. It doesn't show the leader on that diagram. Perhaps we should put that on. But those 5/6 people are full-time. The leader is absolutely full-time. And if the others are not, then they are of significance. This is an investment in making sure that IBP is a continuous process. We do not do IBP on IBP day. So if any of you had the impression, or if any of you leave this session with the view that IBP is a meeting, then I have utterly failed. If you leave the session believing that IBP is a series of meetings, I've sort of failed. If you believe IBP is a orchestrated, facilitated 24/7 process, then I have succeeded, because that is what IBP truly is. So what it needs, therefore, is a structured process prior to and after each of those steps. In other words, we need time to get the data on demand, inventory, capacity, material, etc. We need a formal process, and I mean formal. That's the role of the orchestrators, a formal process of preparing the data and the information. I've been using a word recently, which I sort of regret, but I've been using a word for the process in between the arrows. I started this when I was working with an organization called Taylor's, who are a coffee company in the UK, coffee and tea, Yorkshire tea. And I've also been using it with an organization called Extract, who are a transmission company. But I've started using the term churn. What those 5 people, 6 people do every day is churn. They are in contact with each other. They work with each other. They analyze the data. They identify options. They're creating recommendations. All of that is happening not 10 minutes before the meeting. It's happening all day, every day. Hence the role of those 5 people being full-time. They need the time to prepare the agendas. That's not too difficult, but certainly the recommendations that makes the decision-making in those reviews, which, by the way, we see as a couple of hours. So a sort of acid test of the process would be, how long does your demand review take? If the answer to that question is, all day, then what's happening there is you're trying to drag the process into the meeting. What we're trying to do is push the process into the arrows and make the decisions at the meeting. Hence, we would expect each of those reviews to be a couple of hours. There's no magic to that number, but you get my meaning. The work is done in the hour, and we need a robust process, and we need that process to be adhered to. So if I just flick back for a second, if each of those steps are going to happen every month, it's likely that the demand review will be probably at the beginning of the second week. Let's say it's working day 7 of the month, just to pick a number. It's extremely important that at that time, working day 7, the right people who have been prepared with the right recommendations show up on the 7th. This is not an optional process. This needs to be a robust process. It was interesting. I was working with Abbott Pharmaceuticals a few years ago on a global IBP implementation. It's probably the most globally integrated process that I've ever witnessed. And their designated process said their demand review, which was basically happening in each of the countries, the sales units in the countries, would happen on the 8th working day of the month. Basically, the person who ran that was the general manager of that country, because they were sales units, not manufacturing units. And the rule was that if you didn't hold your demand review on the 8th working day of the month, on the 9th working day of the month, you wouldn't be the general manager of that country. It was pretty formal. It was pretty stark. It was pretty robust. You can imagine if somebody said in that integrated process, I think I'll do mine next week this month, then the process starts to collapse very, very quickly. So it needs that robustness. It needs that structure. By the way, I've mentioned there that it's a formal process. I've mentioned there that it's non-optional. And as we say, it's non-optional, therefore you better show up. I particularly like this particular diagram. I'll flick on to the next one. It says the same thing. But what it's really trying to illustrate is that the little arrows there, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they're the reviews. What it's trying to say is they are the backbone of the process for sure, but we don't do the portfolio review and portfolio management on portfolio management day. We do it 24/7. So the circles are intended to show continuousness, and it's in those circles and in that arrow down the middle called change that the Gang of Five are churning and churning and churning and churning. As I say, I wish I hadn't chosen that word, but I sort of did, and it stuck. So, and what the focus of all of this is all about is creating that integrated plan and closing gaps. Now, closing gaps, that's actually the be-all and end-all of any IBP process. A couple of things about gaps. When we say gap, most people's mind goes negative. It's meant to be 100, it's going to be 90, we've got a 10 gap. What are we going to do about it? That is true. If we have negative gaps, we have to close them. For me, that's a hygiene factor, because they're gaps against the promises that we have made to our lords and masters in the business plan and the strategic plan. So for me, closing negative gaps is simply hygiene. However, what we would really like it to be is creating positive gaps, which is called growth. So it's meant to be 100, how do I make it 110? The second thing about gap is people automatically, almost as I did, although I didn't use the financial terminology deliberately there, people think that this is a gap of money. Well, it could be. It could be a gap in revenue. It could be a gap in margin. It could be a gap in cost. It could be a financial gap. But equally, it could be a gap in talent. It could be a gap in capability. It could be a gap in capacity. It could be a gap in functionality, in market share, in technology. Gap is gap. And the IBP process, as an integrated process, is trying to identify those gaps, wherever those gaps occur, close them or open them up into positive things. So this is intended to show how people are the secret, and in this instance, how the Gang of Five are the secret to this being a continuous process and not a meeting or even a series of meetings. So what is the role of those Gang of Five (6)? They are the orchestrators. I've chosen that word deliberately. I have a bit of a personal hang-up about the word facilitator. It is just personal hang-up. Facilitator to me sounds like somebody who organises the tea, coffee, and books the room. The orchestrator does, again, what it says on the tin, like the orchestra. They pull things together. They coordinate things. They ensure that everything is working in unison. Hence the choice of the word orchestrator, but I don't really mind what you call them. They collate the data, and the presentation for review. They put the agenda and, most importantly, the recommendations together. They discuss and draw out the issues, not just with each other, but with any interested parties. So they don't have to, the Gang of Five don't have to be able to solve the world peace and starvation, but they have to know a man who can. So the discuss and draw out the issues is what really the churn is doing. Yes, they facilitate the meeting and the required decisions. They take the output and communicate it. They link up with the other orchestrators, again, a reference to the churn here of each of the other steps, and work through the issues as a team. I would recommend that they do not work for the IBP process lead. I would recommend they work for the appropriate director who owns that particular step. So the finance director, the sales director, the operations director, etc. But I would recommend they absolutely develop as an IBP team, and when they're working together, they think business, they do not think function. But they retain the connection with their functional area for functional consideration, functional issues. But team is a very key part of this. So what are the objectives overall? Well, it's, as we've said, one set of numbers, an integrated set of plans, realism all the time. Realistic plans do not translate the word realistic to weak, soft, pathetic. Doesn't mean that. Look it up in the English dictionary. It means doable. And any plans that are not realistic, not easy, not challenging. We want them to be challenging, but any plans that are not realistic aren't worth the paper they're written on, because actually asking for more than you can get, you will not get as much as you could have done had you been realistic. It's about creating visibility and transparency in the medium to long term. Take an example of capacity. People have said to me in the past, we have a capacity issue. A little bit emotively, I believe that there is no such thing as a capacity issue. little pregnant pause there for effect, given time and money. You can solve any problem with time and money. Most times we have a capacity issue, it's not the fact that we have a capacity issue, it's the fact that we have a time issue. We can't solve it then. So this is about creating that medium to long term. Obviously, we may not have the money either, but it's about creating that medium to long term and hence being able to do something about it. Now, the horizon we talk about here is over a rolling 24 months, and the emphasis of any IBP process should be at least 4 months to 24 months, not the first 3 months. Talking about gap again, if I use the example of money, if I was to tell any of you that you were, if you were a calendar year, let's say, and if I was to tell you in November that you're going to miss this year's business plan or budget, what can you do about that? Well, the answer is precious little. If I was to tell you right now that you're going to miss the 2021 budget, what can you do about that? Well, who knows, but a lot more. It's about providing that visibility to be able to do something. Clear roles and responsibilities, integrated process, teamwork and cross-functional alignment. I'll get to that in a second. More planning, less execution. More planning, less and execution, less firefighting, not less execution. Consistent performance measures, as I said to begin with, performance measures drive behaviour. Therefore, the thing to do with performance measures is not ask which measure we should have, but first of all, ask which behaviour you want. And when you can answer what behaviour do I want, then figure out what measure will get that. It's also important that those measures are consistent, meaning that there are no contradictory measures. If I measure one group or person in one way and another group or person in exactly the opposite way, then don't get so surprised when those two groups go in opposite directions. Make sure they are integrated. Decision made in a timely fashion, that's the purpose of IBP. Top down, bottom up, that's the gap discussion. Gap, as we've just said, can be anywhere. Now, what IBP is going to do for us, and here's a big people issue, what IBP is going to do for us is, from a bottom-up perspective, that doesn't mean detail, it means what's changed. It's going to tell us what we believe is going to happen in the next 2 years. The phrase we use for that is truth as we know it. We're going to compare truth as we know it to what we want to happen. Where do we know? How do we find out what we want to happen? Well, that's basically the business plan and the strategic plan. If, of course, IBP is telling us we're in line with the business plan and the strategic plan, then there is no gap, then life's good. We can focus on growing. If, however, there is a gap, that's where we see the gap, and therefore we attack that gap in terms of how to close it. The reason I say this is a people issue is I want you to think about in your own businesses, first of all, will you allow this process to tell you the truth? IBP is a powerful process. How could you stop it telling the truth? Well, easily. You could fill of bad data. You could make it not robust. There's lots of things you could do to stop this powerful process working. A Ferrari is a very powerful car. It goes very fast. Could you do something to that Ferrari that would make it go slow? Well, of course you could. You could put, you could let the tires down. You could, alter the timing. There's a lot of things you can do to that powerful machine to make it go slow. In fact, I have a diesel car, and a few months ago, I put petrol in. Guess what? It went slow. So, first of all, will you allow the process to tell you the truth? Secondly, here's the people issue. In your business, is it safe to tell the truth? Or is it safer to tell people what they want to hear and beg forgiveness at the end? And I think the latter is more true than the former. I've asked that question to thousands of executives in my life. Do you want to know the truth or do you want people to lie to you? No. I want to know the truth is always the answer I get. And then somebody sat by my side will say, yeah, the last person that did that doesn't work here anymore. Now, it may not be as stark as hire and fire, but that person's always seen negative, or that person's not promoted, or that person is, not invited to things. So is it safe to tell the truth? And of course, safe to tell the truth requires the first two words, trust and openness. And while most organizations say we're a very open organization, we're not a blame culture, I meet very few who are truly non-blame. I said earlier, the objective here is to deliver the strategy. And what we're trying to create here is what we refer to as distributed, or we call it secure-based leadership. That is leadership at all levels. And again, that is creating a culture of that distributed decision-making and, as we call it, secure-based. So typical organization structure, you may not have all these functions, but there's a CEO, there's commercial, marketing, technical operations, finance, and OD, organizational development, who have teams below them. Now, what we want is the green turquoise box to be working as a team, the leadership team, and we want the teams below to be working as teams. Question: what is the most important thing that must be in place for any team to be a team? And my answer to that question would be not that you have to have the right balance of people, not that you have to have the right behaviors and the right skills. Those things are important. What really matters, however, is that we have one plan. If we do not have one plan, I don't care how well balanced the team is or how well they communicate, they will not go in the same direction. They will not operate as a team. Now, in most organizations, do all of those functions have one plan? They may have one objective: make money. That's not a plan. The plan has to be that each of us have a role to play, and that set of roles and set of activities are integrated. Therefore, where does that one plan come from? Well, guess what? IBP is there to create an integrated set of plans, integrated business planning. And I would argue very strongly that without a successful IBP process, the ability to have strong cross-functional teamwork in the organization and the ability to have one team, as it said in the opening slide, is very, very limited. Hence the importance of IBP from a people and team development perspective. So, teamwork, clear aligned objectives. Oh, by the way, what do we find at the bottom of this chart very often? We find a set of KPIs that point us in opposite directions. So, hence the importance of aligned and clear objectives. Mutual commitment to a single plan. Consistent behavior, but consistent measures, more importantly, that drive a consistent behavior across the organization. And accountability. Accountability is spoken about many times, but accountability has to come with consequences. That doesn't mean beatings, it means consequences. We are going to hold people accountable, and if we haven't got a single set of plans that we're all aligned to, then accountability very difficult to achieve. So where does this all fit into the what we call line of sight? Line of sight meaning that we have a vision, strategies, strategic business objectives, critical success factors and measures, and we can create a line of sight from the measures at the bottom, the KPIs at the bottom, all the way up to those that vision at the top. Where IBP, I've said IBP was not the strategic planning process. That's what I said to begin with. I said it was the strategic execution process. Where do we get the connect between strategy and IBP? And in our view, that is based in this critical success factors. This is just a generic set of numbers, but typically in any one business strategy, you will find 5 or 6 strategic business objectives. In any one strategic business objective, you will find 3 or 4 critical success factors. You take the number 3, take the number 5, make that 15. There's 15 critical success factors that are going to cover our strategic business objectives. If those CSFs are on track, then my SBOs are on track. If my SBO is on track, my strategies are on track, which means I'm going to achieve my vision. It is those 15 or whatever the number is, don't take that as a magic number. It's those 15 critical success factors that need to be reviewed within the IBP process. probably in a traffic light style system. If they're all green, then we're on track. If there's one red, there's a gap. This time it's a gap to strategy, whatever that critical success factor is. And therefore we need recommendations and proposals to close it. Go back to the empowerment statement and the people issue. The left-hand triangle there is clearly the way most organizations traditionally show their organization chart. Now, while what I've done here is simply semantics, there's a great message in this. If you simply draw the organization chart the other way around, as in the right triangle, in other words, the leader is not up front out there in the traditional way, ordering people what to do. The leader is steering and guiding what people do. Just drawing the diagram that way around, for me, tells a very big story. I first saw this with a guy called Godfrey Thoma, who was the MD of a number of British businesses I worked in. This one came from when he was in Pakistan. And what he used to say to me was, Dave, he said, I know nothing about the cigarette industry. That was not true. He knew a great deal. But he said, my job is simply to surround myself by talented people, develop them, and give them the opportunity to run the business. And that's what he spent all day doing. And he drew the diagram this way to try to indicate that. It also fits into this secure-based concept. Secure-based leadership comes actually from a climbing analogy, where you watch a guy climbing a rock face and his colleague is at the bottom of the rope. And the guy at the bottom in the belay will allow the climber to take his own line, allow the climber to make mistakes. He'll even allow the climber to fall off the rock, but he will not allow him to hit the floor and die. He has got his back. And that's where the secure base concept comes from. Secure base leadership is where I've got your back. And just drawing the diagram this way, for me, supports that thinking. And then we say, well, how are we making those decisions through the organization? Well, that's back to IBP. Don't send everything to the leadership team review, make the decisions through the process. So there's a number of challenges with all of this, of course. You know, the optimism that we see so often, everything will be okay, be all right in the night. The end of month crunch and the quarter crunch and the year crunch. We've got to play the game. Is it safe to tell the truth? Transparency, realism, commitment and accountability. Trust goes back to that. Is it safe? IBP is a roughly right, not precisely wrong process. Do not get into too much detail. Do not do IBP in SKU level detail. It's long-term versus short-term. It's easy to think the short-term. It's harder to think long-term. Got to let go. Make issues visible early. We can deal with them that way. Generous listening, you know, that's not my job is to tell you what to do. My job is to listen to you and the process to listen to you through true empowerment and make decisions. And then, of course, the dreaded politics and defensiveness. This page is why the implementation of IBP is all about people, not process. And certainly in IBP's case, it's not systems. It's very little to do with systems. It's quite a lot to do with process, but it's hugely to do with people. And this page is the reason why. So just drawing this to a close now. What we're trying to show here is that, you know, we've got an annual cycle. Most organizations do that with a vision or strategy session. We've got a daily, weekly process. We have to, you know, we make things every day, we sell things every day, we buy things every day, we account things every day. So there's bound to be a daily process, which is the process that links those two things together. And that's what we see IBP trying to do. So, in summary, really, a vision and strategy is communicated to everybody. If I believe IBP is going to be the strategic execution process, then how could it not be how could it be if it's not communicated? Clear focus on strategic execution, I've just said. Integrated, not one set of numbers. Integrated process, not functional practice. There is a balanced scorecard that points us all in the same direction. Integration of all of our processes below the IBP process. Teamwork in pursuit of common objectives and common plan. Process of primary managing the business. So that's what IBP is. It's the primary process for managing the business, and focus on delivery, service, and shareholder value. So guys, that was my final slide. We've got 5 minutes to go. I have already one question, but if you want to ask any other questions, please feel free to do so. The one question was, how do people fit into this IBP process? This is from Anna. Well, Anna, I hope through the process I've sort of answered that, because I believe that people are indeed the absolute key to this. So I think the key things are here are a common set of KPIs, a balanced scorecard, in other words. People have understood the why, not the how, and basically that we've got the resource in place to orchestrate the IBP process. And of course, the final one there is commitment. I would like to meet any of your MDs one day, say a dinner party, and say, hello, who are you? I'm so-and-so. What do you do for a living? Oh, I run the XYZ company. Oh, that sounds interesting. How do you do that? The answer I want, and of course I don't want this verbatim, but the answer I want is, we have an IBP process. That is how I and my senior team manage our business. In other words, it's not something we do as well as, on top of, it's something that we do to run our business. So I hope with that sort of summary and the stuff I've talked about through the webinar, that answered your question. Are there any others? Sounds like deadly silence. So they're pretty late for you guys over in Australia and New Zealand, or just the days just getting going for the guys in the UK and anywhere in between. Okay, so we're nearly bang on time. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk to you this evening. If you have any questions after the seminar, please please do not hesitate to contact us. We'll do our best to answer those, and we will also be sending out the materials from the webinar over the next few days. So thank you very much indeed for being with us, and stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.